many of those people here today again, George. It remains true that young people, as we've seen from these winners of the Legion contest, young people remember as well.
Well, there are the veterans, Don. It's their day, and we'll see an impressive display of medals and decorations for valor, and we'll try to point them out for you as we move along.
Well, one of the veterans is now standing with our Bill Casey down on Confederation Square. Good morning, Bill.
Hi, Don. Well, you mentioned earlier that there are a number of 50th anniversaries this year, one of them being the Battle of the Scheldt in Europe. With me is a man who was involved in that battle, Howard Bailey of the Cameron Highlanders of Ottawa. That battle was over just about this time of year, about 50 years ago. What do you remember about it?
It started around the beginning of October and ended around the 7th of November, around that date. It was very wet and dreary, and a hell of a lot of fighting.
This was an attempt to clear the waterway between the port of Antwerp and the sea.
That's right, so they could bring the ships in. As a matter of interest, the first ship come in was a Canadian ship. So it took a lot of fighting to clear the port and the estuary. So that
there were about 6,000 Canadians either killed or wounded or captured.
There were 6,000
in about 5 weeks.
That's right. That's right. And altogether with the British and the Canadians, there was close to 13,000.
Now you're wearing a military medal. Where did you pick that one up?
In France.
What happened? What was the engagement?
It was an engagement one evening where the Germans were bombing us, shelling this whole area, and some of our vehicles were caught on fire. And I elected to put it out because it was an aiming mark for the artillery, and I succeeded in putting it out and saving the platoon. And anybody else would have done it. I just happened to be there.
Well, that's the kind of medal you get for bravery in the field.
That's right. That's right.
And you were given the ribbon, I understand, from Field Marshal Montgomery?
That's right, in Ghent. We were given the ribbons by Field Marshal Montgomery in Ghent. I received the medal itself from Field Marshal Alexander in Montreal in 1946. Okay,
well, thanks very much, Howard Bailey, with a lot of memories today on this Remembrance Day. Don?
Thank you.
Thank you, Bill. And as Howard Bailey was pointing out, George, the first ship to reach Antwerp after the Battle of the Scheldt was a Canadian ship, and that plays as well to another change in the Remembrance Day ceremony here today, the Merchant Marine taking part in the Vice-Regal wreath-laying ceremony for the first time.
That's right, Don, and they certainly deserve to be here because you know, at the outbreak of World War II, there were only 37 Canadian vessels registered for foreign voyages, and nearly half of those were sunk by enemy surface raiders and U-boats. But before the war's end, there were some 180 ocean-going cargo vessels with some 14,000 seamen of all ranks serving in them. Sadly, 2,000 merchant sailors were lost at sea, and their special Book of Remembrance was unveiled in the Peace Tower in the Memorial Chamber just this morning. So we will have a representation of the Merchant Navy in the wreath-laying ceremony.
Now we're looking at Deputy Prime Minister Sheila Kopp. She is representing the Prime Minister, Mr. Chrétien, of course, in the Far East. Because of the time difference, he has already attended a Remembrance Day ceremony at the Saiwan Military Cemetery in Hong Kong, where there are 283 Canadians buried here.
Where they are buried, and they represent the Winnipeg Grenadiers and the Royal Rifles of Canada from Quebec City, sent there to reinforce the British garrison. They were decimated Christmas Day of 1941 when the garrison fell into Japanese hands. And the Prime Minister will see the grave of Company Sergeant Major John Robert Osborne, Canada's first Victoria Cross winner of World War II, earned with the Winnipeg Grenadiers at Hong Kong.
The Prime Minister was 7 years old when that happened, but there is Deputy Prime Minister representing him today, and she is saying hello now to Janelle Kelly and Paul Hogarth and Catherine Petulko and Brian Ward, who were the Legion Senior Poster and Literary Contest winners. We saw talking with Bill Casey a couple of moments ago, and she said also, I think, hello to Mrs. Wilhelmina Baer, who is the Silver Cross mother. Interesting to note, there are less than 1 million people in Saskatchewan, living in Saskatchewan, but 3 of them represented here, representing that province: Janelle Kelly, Brian Ward, and Mrs. Bayer. So, and there's the Deputy Prime Minister now, shaking hands with the Silver Cross group.
Well, represented in the Canada Remembers contingent are the Royal Regina Rifles and the North Saskatchewan Regiment from Saskatoon. So you'll find people, veterans, attending here today or represented here today by men in uniform and by provincial flags and banners. So it's very appropriate that the young people are here as well.
And young people, of course, include Ms. Copps in terms of thinking of the end of the Second World War. She was, of course, not born until after the end of the Second World War, as now were many Canadians, and yet particularly as these 50th anniversary ceremonies remembering first D-Day and then next year the end of the Second World War, a lot of Canadians who have no personal memory will, of course, remember and learn about the sacrifices made by Canadians. And in that vein, we'd like to say a special good morning to people watching, Canadians watching us from veterans wards across the country and veterans homes, people who came home from the war but whose battle continues and who meet it every day with dignity and courage. A special good morning to you as you join us for the National Remembrance Day ceremony here in Ottawa.
And we'd like to give a special national salute to Lieutenant Colonel Charles Cecil Ingersoll Merritt, the commanding officer of the South Saskatchewan Regiment, who won Canada's 2nd Victoria Cross at Dieppe, August the 19th, 1942. And if Colonel Merritt is watching, we send him our best. He is one of 2 Canadians, including Smokey Smith, who is here, who are still living and who have earned the Victoria Cross, the highest award for valor in the military in the Commonwealth.
You see Parliament Hill, the National War Memorial, just down from Parliament Hill. People get up around the East Block on Parliament Hill for a good view of the ceremony. They are looking straight across Wellington Avenue and into the Parliament building to the National War Memorial, and there they see, lined up there, that is the Governor General's foot guard barge in front of the RCMP contingent. But as we see now, Governor General Rain Titian's car turning onto Confederation Square as he arrives. Governor General's limousine pulling up now, where he will be greeted by Hugh Green, who is the new president of the Royal Canadian Legion. Also by Ms. Copps. And there he is, the Governor General, accompanied by his wife, Gerda Titian, leading Ms. Copps, and Hugh Green, the Legion president. This will be the last Remembrance Day of which the Governor General is in office. His term ends in January of next year. He has been at every Remembrance Day but one, when he also was in the Far East and went to a Commonwealth War Graves ceremony on Remembrance Day in Okinawa, I believe.
Yes, that's right, Don. And as you can see there, he's wearing the Order of Canada.
Right! Royal salute!
See you again. Hi, how are you? I heard you were out speaking at the Canadian Club yesterday.
Yes, I'm so sorry I missed the first one at
Well, but I hear it was a great success.
Well, following the Vice-Regal salute, combination of God Save the Queen and No Canada, the Governor General now meeting some of the other dignitaries. He was saying hello a moment ago to General John de Chastelain, the Chief of the Defense Staff. General de Chastelain back as Chief of the Defense Staff to lay a wreath at the National War Memorial. A year ago, he was the ambassador in Washington.
Father is a graduate of Yorkton Collegiate.
Is he?
Yeah, so I know that area. You and I are neighbors.
Yeah, thank you.
She's a
What a-
young 102, actually.
I don't believe that for a moment. I think it's wonderful that you would be
Well, we
here.
have a good country here, and that does a lot of, it's good for people.
It is true. You're absolutely right. Hello. Plaisir de voir. Hello, Mrs. Smith. How are you? What a great pleasure and honor. Oh, I'm all set today. Hello, Smokey. How are you?
Very good news.
I'm all the better for seeing you. So, wonderful. We're going to have a chance to have tea as well.
Oh, yeah.
Hello.
Good morning. It's nice to
Congratulations.
see you. We often talk about
Look
that
forward to
wonderful trip
seeing
we
you
have
again.
Oh,
Hi.
we have fun.
We met
So wonderful.
at Mount Pearl, Newfoundland.
Congratulations.
Congratulations to you. Hi.
Congratulations.
Hi. Where are you
You're
from?
from Mount Pearl, are you?
Yeah.
Were you
Indian
there when
Head,
we were there last-
Saskatchewan.
last
We've really got a
week?
great Saskatchewan representation here. Congratulations.
Good
Hi,
morning.
Brian. How are you?
And where at
Abernathy.
Saskatchewan?
Holy
Indian
mackerel.
Head. Isn't that wonderful?
Are you
It's just
playing
a-
basketball? Yeah, I hope so, yeah.
Good morning. Good morning.
We should point out, of course, a very prominent member from Saskatchewan of this ceremony is the Governor General himself
Indeed,
from
he is.
Saskatoon, Saskatchewan, and making the point that we made earlier. There are a lot of people from Saskatchewan taking part in this ceremony, and the Governor General asking, I guess it was Brian Ward, are you going to play basketball? In fact, the University of Saskatchewan, that is what the Governor General did himself.
Yeah, I know.
I'm talking again with General de Chastelain and his wife Wendy. See behind the Governor General, that is Lawrence Macaulay. He is the Secretary of State in the Cabinet for Veterans Affairs. He too will be laying a wreath at the ceremony in just a couple of moments.
As Pipe Major Hugh McPherson, the Pipe Major of the Air Command Pipes and Drums based at Canadian Forces Base Ottawa. He will play the Lament, the Flowers of the Forest, after the last post.
The East Block of the Parliament Buildings. Until 1939, Remembrance Day ceremonies were held at the Parliament Buildings, George, but with the dedication of the National War Memorial in May of 1939 by King George VI, the ceremonies were moved across the street, and they have been held here ever since.
Ever since, Don.
Member of the RCMP, part of the guard at the memorial, signifying, of course, that the RCMP now are also members of Canadian peacekeeping operations, and in fact, the peacekeeping mission to Haiti is involving members of the RCMP.
Yes, indeed, and they provided quite a contingent to World War II as military police as well. Sentries on the National War Memorial this morning are well represent the Maritimes. At least 3 of them are from Nova Scotia.
Atlantic Canada with a large number of military bases for the population, but of course, being on the seacoast explains part of that.
We have Master Seaman Richard Fournier of the Canadian Forces Fleet School. He's from Sackville, Nova Scotia. And Master Corporal Bert Chestnut of West Nova Scotia Regiment, from Kings County, Nova Scotia. And
Now the veterans with their memories as we get ready for the ceremony. This is the poignant moment, a moment of silence before the ceremony begins. When people think back, the veterans 50 years ago today, where were they? In the hedgerows of Normandy? Were they in Italy? On the Atlantic Ocean? Were they flying Lancasters? All young men, now in their mid-70s, all young men risking everything in the defense of freedom.
In a moment, we'll hear Sergeant Bruno Drollet, the duty trumpeter.
Now, as the official party moves into position, the ceremony is about to begin. It is a religious ceremony. We will not be speaking through it. The ceremony will carry itself.
They shall not grow old as we that are left grow old. Age shall not weary them, nor the years condemn. At the going down of the sun and in the morning, we will remember them.
Ils ne vieilliront pas comme nous, qui les avons survécu. Ils ne connaîtront jamais l'outrage ni le poids des années. Quand viendra l'heure du crépuscule et celle de l'aurore, nous nous souviendrons d'eux.
Let us pray. Lord God, we remember before you with gratitude all those men and women of the armed forces and merchant navy who struggled on land and sea and in the air, that justice and freedom might prevail against tyranny. We commemorate especially those who did not return from the war or who remained in mind or body. We remember them and praise you for your goodness. Lord God, we remember before you with gratitude all those who remained at home, bearing the pains of separation and anxiety for their loved ones. We remember those who walked the light of home and bore the trauma of war with courage, hope, and good humor. We remember them and praise you for their goodness. Lord God, we remember before you with gratitude those who labored on the land and in the factory, in public service and private industry. We remember them and praise you for their goodness. Lord God, we remember before you with gratitude those who cared for the well-being of men and women at war. We remember the skill, the compassion, the endurance and courage of doctors and chaplains, nurses, and all those who work to relieve human suffering, often at great cost to themselves. As we stand before our national memorial, we remember the spirit of service and sacrifice of everyone who bore the burden of the time. Finally, let us dedicate ourselves once more to stand together as our forebears did for justice, peace, and freedom, that their sacrifice may continue to burn as a beacon of hope throughout the world. All these prayers we ask through Christ our Lord. Amen.
Nous nous arrêtons pour réfléchir sur une page de notre histoire où nous retrouvons héroïsme et courage, tristesse et douleur, vaillance et loyauté. Nous nous souvenons avec gratitude de nos parents et amis qui, dans les forces armées du Canada, ont quitté notre pays pour se joindre à nos alliés et combattre pour que justice et liberté prévalent contre la tyrannie et l'oppression. Nous nous commémorons principalement ceux qui ne sont pas revenus de la guerre ou qui, encore aujourd'hui, souffrent des blessures subies au combat. Nous nous souvenons aussi avec gratitude de ceux et celles qui sont restés ici, contribuant à la paix par leur dévouement et leur travail, malgré l'anxiété et l'inquiétude.
Let us pray. Lord God, we remember before you with gratitude the heroic lives of those who set out from our shores and fought so that justice and freedom might prevail against oppression. We stand with thanksgiving in our hearts for the victory over tyranny achieved under the hand of God. We honor the human courage and self-sacrifice which made that achievement possible. We also remember the many thousands of men and women who lost their lives in defense of human freedom. And we honor the memory of many who were relatives and friends and paid the final sacrifice in order that we should be free. We acknowledge the injustice, violence, and cruelty of our human race, which still disfigures our world. We ask for forgiveness and healing. We dedicate ourselves once more to stand together for justice, peace, and freedom, that the sacrifice of our forebears may continue to burn as a beacon of hope throughout the world. We make our prayer through Jesus Christ our Lord. Amen.
Laying his wreath on behalf of the people of Canada. Deputy Prime Minister laying a wreath on behalf of the Government of Canada. Lawrence Macaulay, the Secretary of State for Veterans Affairs, laying a wreath on behalf of his department. This is General John de Chastelain, the Chief of the Defense Staff, laying a wreath on behalf of the Armed Forces. Kelly, Paul Horgarth, Catherine Petulko, and Brian Ward, the senior poster and literary contest winners, along with Courtney White, a girl guide who is the wreath bearer, laying a wreath on behalf of the youth of Canada. K. Ray. He is laying the wreath. This is on behalf of the Merchant Marine. Hugh Green, the president of the Royal Canadian Legion, wreath on behalf of the 500,000 Legion members in Canada. This is Philemon Y. Yang. He is the ambassador of Cameroon here in Ottawa. He is the Dean of the Diplomatic Corps, the longest serving ambassador. And he lays a wreath on behalf of the Diplomatic Corps. And these are other ambassadors, high commissioners, and attachés in Ottawa. They also lay individual wreaths. On the other side of the National War Memorial, various different veterans organizations, civic and public groups also lay their individual wreaths. See, Ovid Mercredi is the national chief of the Assembly of First Nations. He is laying a wreath, but there's also wreaths being laid by the National Aboriginal Veterans Association. Sam Sinclair from Edmonton is the president of that organization. He is a veteran of the Second World War. George, we heard while the Vice-Regal Party was laying its wreaths, the Central Choir of the Ottawa Board of Education under the direction of Barbara Clark singing In Flanders Fields. And we've been hearing also the Canada Remembers Band.
They played a medley of songs made popular in World War I, Don. Roses are blooming in Picardy, There's a Long, Long Trail a-Winding, Keep the Home Fires Burning. Made popular in England while Canadians waited there to go into action during the First World War.
And on the other side of the National War Memorial, the diplomats continue to lay their wreaths. More than 70 in all from different countries represented here in Ottawa will lay their wreaths at the National War Memorial. There's Dennis Bouchard, the musical director of the Canada Remembers Band.
He was also the former director of the Central Band of the Canadian Forces, which was the duty band here last year.
Now, we saw in the ceremony Robert K. Ray laying the wreath on behalf of the Merchant Navy, and they're obviously someone who served in the Merchant Navy during the war. 2,000 Canadians lost their lives at sea. Members of the Merchant Navy. Over the years, they have pressed to be recognized as full veterans, as other people who served during the war. And as you were pointing out earlier, George, earlier today, in the Memorial Chamber of the Peace Tower in the center block on Parliament Hill, a book of remembrance was opened for the 2,000 members of the Merchant Marine who gave their lives during the war. And each day in the Memorial Chamber, a page is turned in each of the books, now for the Merchant Navy, but also for the Navy, the Air Force, and the Army. A page is turned, and fresh names come forward in the books of remembrance.
And the Merchant Navy, Don, received the Canadian Forces, the Canadian Volunteer Service Medal just in the last 2 years. Canada was the only country that issued a volunteer medal of all countries in the Commonwealth. But the Merchant Navy seamen never received that until just 2 years ago, because they were never designated officially as members of the armed forces, although their contribution was absolutely vital to the war effort.
Now, on the west side of the National War Memorial, individuals, various different groups also laying their wreaths now as the Remembrance Day 1994 continues. Among those wreaths is one that was laid by Douglas Jung, who was the first Chinese Canadian to be elected to Parliament in 1957, and he has led a group of 30 Chinese Canadian war veterans down to Ottawa. They were received yesterday by the Governor General of Rideau Hall. Chinese Canadians did not have voting rights during the war, but a number of them, many of them did volunteer. And Mr. Jung is leading that contingent today. Are from Le Régiment de la Chaudière, from Lac Mégantic in Quebec, from the Canadian Forces Fleet School, from Sackville, Nova Scotia, from the West Nova Scotia Regiment, another regiment that fought with the 1st Canadian Infantry Division in Italy, and one from the Air Force 14 Air Maintenance Squadron, Greenwood, Nova Scotia, along with the 2 flag orderlies on either side of the Governor General's dais, Corporal Tim Richter of the Governor General's Foot Guards and Corporal Ron Alien of 8th Wing Trenton. The RCMP and one of the nursing sisters also represented as 5 sentinels. There's a very good look up at peacekeeping medals worn by a veteran of Korea and other duties. And George, this year peacekeepers are playing a particular role not laying a wreath, but in terms of the ceremony and their recognition.
For the first time, Don, the peacekeeping veterans are included in today's March Past. We'll see them right behind, directly behind the veterans of World War II and Korea. They have a strong representation. They'll be wearing blue berets and blue blazers, so we should be able to pick them out quite easily for you.
Of course, the March Past will be underway very shortly. As the final people lay their wreaths, we saw a moment ago a tremendous number of wreaths, again, around the National War Memorial, as there is every year here in Ottawa on Remembrance Day.
War is ugly. Peace is lovely. But even in peace, we must remember war. We remember the wars involving Canadians because had they not fought and prevailed, there would be no peace. That is the basic lesson of today. But there are other lessons. The way we waged war conveys valuable insights into our great country. War involved teamwork. Individual egos were subordinated to the greater cause. War involved willingness to sacrifice one's life for one's country and for one's fellow Canadian. And fellow Canadian meant any Canadian, no matter what ethnic origin, no matter what race, no matter what religion, no matter what linguistic heritage, no matter from which native community, and yes, no matter from what province. We remember those who gave their lives in war for our peace. But the challenge to maintain that peace and wholeness is an ongoing struggle. In war, we were together as one. In peace, dare we do any less? Let us remember those who fought together in war by remaining together, united as one, in peace, camaraderie, and mutual appreciation. Amen.
And with the playing of God Save the Queen by the Canada Remembers Band under the direction of Dennis Bouchard, the formal ceremony here, the wreath-laying ceremony, the Remembrance Day ceremony, comes to a conclusion, but we are not finished here yet because the March Past, as you point out, is about to begin shortly. The Governor General will make his way to a small dais over on Wellington Street, and accompanying him will be the Silver Cross Mother and other dignitaries, and then the parade begins.
This is the third and really final phase of this program this morning, Don. It takes place in 3 stages. We saw the assembly as the whole parade, veterans and serving members formed up. The second phase, of course, is the actual ceremony of remembrance, and now the third phase is the March Past. Not only as a way of conclusion, but it provides the opportunity for every serving member and past serving members to reaffirm their oath of allegiance, and that's really what that is symbolically. The eyes right given to the Governor General is a compliment expressing the bond of service.
Well, the Governor General making his way now, shaking hands with as many people as he can. And what he is doing is also symbolic, really, of what the final stage, too, the parade is. It is a reunion as well. The silence and the memories and the sadness of the Remembrance Day ceremony give way to the reunion aspect.
This is the... Hello, how are you? Bonjour, bonjour. Good morning, Holly. Congratulations. Wonderful to see you all here. To see the...
Now, this is the Legion Color Party. Commander Jim Wiles, they are coming up the west side of the National War Memorial on Elgin Street. That's getting ready to lead the parade.
That's right, Don. Jim Wiles, former member of the Royal Canadian Mounted Police. He's done this for about 7 years now.
Flags of each of the provinces in the color party. The Governor General, though, in no hurry to get to his dais. He is, of course, a very warm and friendly person, and he is enjoying the crowd as he works his way past the War Memorial and on to Wellington Street.
He seems to have a word for everybody. Very, very friendly, very affable gentleman.
We've got a chance yet, Your Excellency. I think I got to get another hip replacement.
Well, this will be his last year. Governor General at the
Somebody here is
National Remembrance
103
Day
years
ceremony.
old. See, you met the Silver Cross winner. Isn't she wonderful? She stood throughout the whole...
Beautiful. Great.
What a...
Great.
Thank you. Okay, let's go. From Yorkton, Saskatchewan.
I've done some good cousin.
Yeah, everybody. See Yorkton and die. That's where's that Venice? I can't remember.
Now, the Governor General talking there to a gentleman who he said was 103 years old, and of course Mrs. Bayer from Yorkton, Saskatchewan is 102 years old, the Silver Cross mother.
Well, we have World War I veterans here, and several of them in wheelchairs. Of course, they don't take part in the march past, but they are here. The Royal Canadian Legion has brought them here, all expenses paid, to be here at the national ceremony.
And last year, the 75th anniversary of the ending of the First World War, of course, there were honored guests, one from each province, brought here by the Legion, veterans of the First World War. And as you point out, every year they do turn out still, those remaining veterans with their memories and what memories they must bring to Remembrance Day. In Ottawa, Remembrance Day is no longer a school holiday. They do pause at 11 o'clock, but a number of schools do make it as part of their program to bring students to Remembrance Day. And as you can see, a large crowd here today, George. I think larger than perhaps some in recent years.
That's right, Don. I think that the feeling of the Ministry of Education was that it's better for young people to stay in school and learn something about the importance and meaning of Remembrance Day than just to regard it as another holiday and to be out having fun and games without really observing Canada's National Day of Sorrow.
The Governor General breaking away now from greeting people and being led by a member of the RCMP over to the dais as he gets ready now to take the salute. We saw the color party, George, already in place, so the parade is ready to go. It's being accompanied now by Hugh Green, who is the President of the Royal Canadian Legion.
Well, we'll see two color parties, presumably, because we've got the Veterans Color Party and then we've got the Canada Remembers Color Party. So this parade will be larger than usual, Don, and it will be perhaps more colorful.
A plethora of color parties, George. Hugh Green served in the Royal Canadian Air Force in Canada, England, and Europe between 1942 and 1946, so he too, as President of the Legion, would have his memories of 50 years ago. These wreaths are left in place throughout today here in Ottawa, and many people do what those young children were doing. They come and take a look at all of the different wreaths with their bands on, telling which organizations and which people have placed them. You were talking about some World War I vets. That could very possibly be one of them there, George.
It could be Don, but in actual fact, he's wearing the 1939 45 star, so it makes him a rather elderly World War II vet.
So it couldn't be. The Governor General is in an affable mood today. He is stopping and greeting a lot of people, which is why the parade is slightly slower than usual getting underway. Nobody seems to mind. They're enjoying meeting the Governor General.
Well, as we hear an appropriate first march called Voice of the Guns, one of Kenneth Alfred's most famous marches, played by the Canada Remembers Band in their static position, the combined pipes and drums of Air Command and the Cameron Highlanders of Ottawa lead the veterans, and here they are. Here's the World War I medley. Has anyone seen the Colonel? It's a long way to Tipperary and Mademoiselle from Armiteers.
Very little changes from year to year at Remembrance Day, including the music, George, to which the veterans march. But of course, well, World War I veterans, as you point out, scarce, but nonetheless tunes that all of the veterans enjoy. And here comes now the Legion Color Party, again led by Jim Wiles. And someone with an excellent vantage point, and one a lot warmer than most people have here. She is in the Chateau Laurier Hotel, which is just across Confederation Square from the National War Memorial. And here they come by now, the Governor General. Here come the vets, the people everyone comes to see each year. The Veterans Parade Commander is Leo LeBlanc.
Leo LeBlanc has 13 years of service. He served in the Royal Canadian Dragoons, one of the regular force armored regiments, the senior one, as a matter of fact. He served in Korea.
Everybody knows Mademoiselle from Armiteers. You don't have to go back to World War I to recognize that.
I think the song suggested that too, Don.
A large contingent of veterans turning out today on a beautiful, chilly, but beautiful day here in Ottawa for Remembrance Day 1994. With the 50th anniversary of D-Day this year, the 50th anniversary of the end of World War II next year, a lot of people remembering 50 years back and perhaps coming out in years this year when in years past they might not have bothered.
Seems to be a very large turnout of World War II veterans.
Very large, very large.
These are the commissionaires. The body of commissionaires are all dressed the same way, as you can see, but members of the commissionaires will not accept anyone who was not in the armed forces. And here are the peacekeepers, Don, dressed in their United Nations blue berets This is the first time that a contingent of veteran police keepers have taken part in the Remembrance Day Parade.
Well, of course, Canada, prominent in UN peacekeeping since 1947, serving in every UN peacekeeping mission.
And to date, sadly, Don, we've lost 100 Canadians in peacekeeping duties. Last year we announced 92. It has risen to 100 as of today.
And now we are looking at, or we were looking at, the Governor General's Foot Guard.
Regimental band of the Governor General's Foot Guards, who are just ready to step off here. The Canada Remembers Band is out of sight. They are in a static position so that all units in the parade can hear them equally, and that's what helps to maintain the step.
They play the march, but they're the one group that does not march. Here is a band that is marching but not playing.
That's
As
right.
you said, the Governor General's Foot Guard, they look warm. They have the proper attire, George, I think.
In their winter dress, with their bearskin headdress and the familiar Athol gray greatcoats of the Foot Guards. This is their regimental march, Milanolo.
Being played, as you see there, by the Canada Remembers Band, led by the musical director, Dennis Bouchard. And this is the Canada Remembers contingent, isn't it?
This is the Canada Remembers contingent, Don, with their 18-member flag party. And you'll notice in this contingent a great variety of headdress because they come from all over the country. Their names read like a tour guide of Canada from coast to coast. Represented in there are the British Columbia Regiment, the South Alberta Light Horse, the Royal Regina Rifles and the North Saskatchewan Regiment, the Royal Winnipeg Rifles, the Argyll and Sutherland Highlanders of Canada from Hamilton, Lake Superior Scottish, the Algonquin Regiment, Le Régiment de la Chaudière from Lévis, and the 6th Battalion of the Royal 22nd Regiment from St. Hyacinthe, the Royal New Brunswick Regiment, Nova Scotia Highlanders PEI Regiment, and the 1st and 2nd Battalions of the Royal Newfoundland Regiment. Here's the march past of the Navy, Heart of Oak, and the Navy is represented here by HMCS Carleton.
Governor General's Foot Guards, marching by the Governor General as he gets ready to take the salute from his foot guards, the guards which stand duty, particularly in the summer, outside Rideau Hall, the official residence of the Governor General.
They're the Senior Militia Infantry Regiment of the Canadian Army. And behind them, the Cameron Highlanders of Ottawa in their full dress. Their forebears, probably their grandfathers, were in the 3rd Canadian Infantry Division that went in on D-Day.
Well, the Scots, they wouldn't complain, but if the Governor General's foot guards were well-dressed, they would appear to be less so. Wearing their kilts on this nippy November morning.
Well, there's 7 yards of wool in those, Don, and they're really quite warm. And here's the contingent of the Royal Canadian Mounted Police. You can see women represented there as constables and NCOs. And behind the RCMP unit, we have the cadets. Sea Cadets, Royal Canadian Sea Cadet Corps, followed by the Royal Canadian Army Corps, Army Cadet Corps, and then the Royal Canadian Air Cadets. And our Canada Remembers Band has gone bilingual, Don. This is the march Mon Ami, written by a Canadian.
And very appropriate it is. Here on Remembrance Day, as friends gather, amis gather to remember fallen comrades, but also to remember their own experiences. Many of them 50 years ago, as we were saying, where were they? Were they in Normandy, or Belgium, in Italy? Were they at sea? Were they Lancasters or Spitfires? The memories that must flood back on Remembrance Day for these people, these veterans. If you weren't there, it's impossible to really understand or imagine.
One can't help but think that 80 years ago, Don, the shot that was fired from an assassin's gun in Sarajevo ignited the world and triggered the guns of August, which started World War I 80 years ago.
Sarajevo, of course, still prominent in the news, and when we were looking at the peacekeepers, how appropriate that is. Canadian peacekeepers, almost 2,000 of them serving, not right at Sarajevo, but certainly in the former Yugoslavia and Bosnia and that area.
We wonder if we've made much progress toward world peace, but that is a most frustrating and dangerous assignment for our peacekeepers over there. And as we mentioned earlier, to date, we've lost 100 Canadians in peacekeeping operations since 1947.
And yet, while Sarajevo remains in the news for the same sad reasons, it's also true that it is 50 years almost, 49 years, 50 years next year until the end of the Second World War, the last time there were major Canadian losses in a military battle, 40,000 people dying in that war, 60,000 out of a smaller population, and a shorter war dying in the First World War.
The Canada Remembers contingent is primarily based on the proportion of volunteers that were established in each of the three services. So you have about 20% from the Navy, about 20% from the Air Force, and the remainder from the Army.
The Canada's Remembers contingent, we first saw them back in June in Green Park at the dedication of the War Memorial across from Buckingham Palace for the Canadians who had fought in both the First and the Second World Wars. They were doing their drill. The Irish Guards were there as well, and many people thought that the Canadians outperformed the Irish Guards. So they are certainly people about which we can be proud, and they will be going back, of course, to Europe as we get ready to remember the end of the Second World War in May 1945, the 50th anniversary next year.
Well, that would take some doing. They are a good unit, but they're made up of both regular and reserve units, and there are a lot of militia units represented in this contingent, and it was so because without the militia, the Canadian Army wouldn't have existed.
Well, George, we can be proud of them as we are proud of the people who served in both the First World War, the Second World War, the Korean conflict, our peacekeepers as they are around the world today and as they have been since 1947. This concludes our coverage of Remembrance Day 1994 from the National War Memorial here in Ottawa. George, thank you for being with me again. I appreciate it. We have remembered those who went to war and paid the ultimate price, and we have remembered those who went to war and came home, and we have said thank you to them. And thank you for joining us as well here at the National War Memorial. I'm Don Newman for CBC News. Good day from the National Capital.
This is the Canadian Broadcasting Corporation. We now join programming in progress.
Welcome to
Jurassic. There's Canadians. Go get them.
From the #1 this morning, here are the sights and sounds from those ceremonies. I see sight. lest we forget. We will have more on the Maritime Remembrance Day ceremonies tonight on Live at 5 and again on the ATV Evening News at 6.
Listing the war dead of the merchant marine, civilian men and women who kept the cargo lanes open across the oceans.
Of those gallant Canadians and Newfoundlanders formerly serving in the merchant marine who gave their lives for freedom.
The book will remain in the Peace Tower, along with the other books of remembrance commemorating the lives of Canadians who died in war. As Remembrance Day has evolved, it has grown to become a ceremony commemorating both unity and diversity, one that serves as a reminder that on the battlefield, soldiers fought together regardless of race, religion, language, or province. Rabbi Reuven Belka said that wartime ethic should become a peacetime standard.
In war, we were together as one. In peace, dare we do any less? Let us remember those who fought together in war by remaining together, united as one, in peace, camaraderie, and mutual appreciation.
The ceremony ended as it has always done, with the traditional march past. And for the first time today, a contingent of peacekeeping veterans. So far, 100 Canadians have died wearing the blue beret. Karen Webb, CBC News, Ottawa.
World War. The names of the thousands who lost their lives have now been listed in the Books of Remembrance in the Peace Tower in Ottawa. And there's a new book out here in the Maritimes chronicling the experiences of members of the Merchant Marine. It's called Running the Gauntlet. It was written by Dartmouth author Mike Parker. He joins us now in the studio. Mike, thank you for taking the time to come in and talk to us today.
My pleasure.
Why a book on the Merchant Marine?
Well, I had been doing some reading on the Battle of the Atlantic and the convoy wars, and all the books had been written from a naval perspective, nothing from the merchant service. So that was basically why I wanted to give them a voice and let them have their say after 50 years.
It's very much a part of not just the war history, but our maritime history as well. I remember as a child growing up in Sydney, the old people talking about how the harbor was so full of those convoys, and here in Halifax as well, during the war. It's very much tied to our history, isn't it?
Yes, it is. The convoys went out of here in World War I and in World War II as well. In fact, Halifax was the major naval port during the war.
Can you tell us a little about what it was like for those brave people?
Well, the merchant service, it was for them it was the highest casualty rate of any of our forces. They had a loss of 1 in 8 compared to, let's say, the Navy, 1 in 47. They were virtually undefended during the first couple of years of the war and sailed on any sort of vessel whatsoever that they could get their hands on. It wasn't until 1943, basically, that things came together and they were able to defeat the U-boat menace, but they fought through against the U-boats and the fort and the elements and anything else that stood in their way. But if it hadn't been for them, the entire Allied war effort would have ground to a halt.
Obviously, the supplies were badly needed in Europe. Did you ask the many men that you interviewed in preparing this book how they felt in the times they went out, as you say, virtually undefended? What kept them going?
Well, they had a sense of duty the same as any of the other forces did. You know, it was their way to serve the war effort. Many of them were too young to get in the regular forces. Some of them were physically unfit. Some were judged to be the wrong color, and others just chose the merchant service as their way to serve. But it was a sense of duty, and that kept them going back many times after being torpedoed 3 or 4 times. And I think, too, that's what's most outstanding about their effort is not so much the torpedoings and that we're familiar with, but the psychological terror of being a sitting duck on a tanker or an ammunition ship and waiting 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, sometimes for months on end, to meet their maker and never knowing when it was going to happen.
I guess they must be happy this year to finally gain the kind of recognition that they have so long deserved.
They are somewhat happy. I mean, it's taken pretty well 50 years. They were recognized supposedly in 1992 as veterans. I think, though, that if you look at the paper yesterday, you'll find that there are still a number of outstanding issues that they haven't received compared to our other regular forces. They're bitter, understandably.
Understandably so. We're out of time at this point, Mr. Parker, but thank you very much for coming in to talk to us about this. It's a fascinating book, and it's long overdue.
Thank you.
Thank you. Still ahead on ATV News 1. During the war, Old Blue Eyes was the musical hero of the day. In a moment, new sounds from his daughter. The Sinatra tradition continues.
Of wars past and present. Remembrance Day ceremonies are being held across the country. This morning, there were the traditional commemorations at the National War Memorial in Ottawa. Deputy Prime Minister Sheila Copps and Governor General Ray Natishin led a group of dignitaries.
Great to see you again. Hi, how are you?
One battle in particular will be remembered in Newfoundland, the Battle of Beaumont Hamel. On that day, during World War I, hundreds of young soldiers from Newfoundland were killed. Only one man from the regiment is still alive. His name is Walter Tobin. Here's Brenda Murray with his story.
Autumn in New England. Beautiful, peaceful. And the town of Waldoboro, Maine is quieter than most. It's a sleepy little community in the center of the northern state. Here, the only things that seem to change are the leaves. Walter Tobin says he feels a bit like a leaf himself these days, the only one left on the tree. For this 96-year-old is quite simply one of a kind. Tobin is the only survivor of the Newfoundland regiment that fought at the historic Battle of Beaumont Hamel. It was in 1914 when Tobin signed up with the regiment. This is a picture of Tobin and his school teachers. He quit school at 16 to go to war.
The reason I joined up was because I wanted to be with my brother Jimmy.
He didn't want to be left behind.
There's Jimmy. He come from us.
It was going to be a great adventure for the two brothers, although Tobin wondered on more than a few occasions if he'd done the right thing. He still shudders when he thinks of the conditions they lived in.
We had no beds, of course. We just slept in barns on bare wood or straw, hay, and we didn't take our clothing off. I don't recall taking my clothes off although I was in France. And that was from March right up until July 1st.
France, where they prepared for the beginning of the Battle of the Somme, July 1st, 1916. The British command ordered the Newfoundlanders to recapture the tiny village of Beaumont Hamel. The Germans' position had been shelled for days in advance. The Newfoundlanders didn't think there'd be much resistance.
Well, most of us, what we were looking forward to is capturing Germans and also getting souvenirs. And we had the thought in mind that there'd be nothing to it. We wouldn't meet opposition because of that terrific bombardment. It's quite something.
But it turned out the Germans were still safe in their trenches. The Newfoundlanders never had a chance. Hundreds of young soldiers were killed.
I don't think any of the fellows fired their rifles because we didn't see the Germans. They were many yards away from us. And I don't think there was a shot fired by any of the fellows of the regiment.
Ironically, that piece of land the soldiers died for now does belong to Newfoundland. It was actually purchased for the province after the war. The trenches are still there, too. 801 Newfoundlanders went over the top that fateful morning. After a hail of gunfire that lasted about a half an hour, only 68 were still standing. Walter Tobin was not one of them.
I was hit on the left hip, and I was under fire, and I was bleeding quite severely, and I got back to the trench.
Oh.
I crawled back as best I could, and got back into the trench, and how I was taken care of there, I really don't recall.
Tobin still has the bullet that hit him.
Yeah, this one in my hip.
Tobin returned to fight after Beaumont Hamel, but he was shot again and more seriously hurt. His older brother Jimmy died in another battle in France. He was 24 years old. Walter Tobin was in St. John's when the war ended, but he decided not to stay. Although Tobin's parents were Newfoundlanders, he was born in Boston, and he wanted to move back to the bigger city. So in 1919, he left Newfoundland and Beaumont Hamel behind him.
I was isolated, and if I talked about it here, and the American fellows, they were not terribly interested, but the British or the colonials did. They were more interested in their own particular. In fact, I joined the Legion Post in Boston, and these fellows didn't speak my language at all.
Years went by before Tobin thought a lot about his war service. But 3 years ago, he went back to France. He visited Jimmy's grave. And he returned to Beaumont Hamel. He went there with another veteran on the 75th anniversary of the battle. But now all the other veterans of that day are dead. Tobin is the only one left.
Boy, I don't know. Why? And so many fine, decent people died. It's amazing to think that. Well, my brother Jimmy, he had a pretty good reason for living. He was married, had a child, his wife had a baby. And there's so many fine, educated gentlemen who could do more, you know, or do things than probably in Newfoundland, businessmen. What the hell, I don't have a trade. I just walk around and breathe, that's about the size of it.
Tobin lives alone in an apartment he inherited from his sister. All of his close relatives and most of his friends have been dead for years. Tobin says he doesn't want to go to a nursing home. He doesn't have the money. Instead, he'd like to come back to Newfoundland to live in the Veterans Hospital in St. John's. There he'd have a lot of people to share his war stories with, and he says maybe he wouldn't have to eat alone anymore. For Midday, I'm Brenda Murray in Waldoboro, Maine.
That's sad, eh?
That's so poignant.
Yeah. I remember standing at Cavendish Beach in PEI, and there's a little cenotaph there overlooking the beach and the sun coming in, and there's a little inscription there that says, you know, always remember the people who sacrificed to keep the land free, and it just strikes me every year.
Yeah, they're incredibly moving.
We'll be right back.
This is a little fuchsia, a little hardy fuchsia, although we're never quite sure out here on the coast what kind of winter we're going to get. So very simple thing to do, get yourself a piece of chicken wire that I've cut already so that it'll fit around like a little tube, just around the outside of the plant, get it all in here. And just to hold it in place, you need to put something like a cane, a stick, just run it down through so that it isn't going to get kicked or moved when somebody walks through the bed or we get a high wind or something like that. Then the leaves that you use, it is important that they're good and dry. So you rake them up or leave them in the sun and keep them in the shed overnight so they're nice and dry. And just put them in all around the plant. And one little tip that I would pass on for other parts of the country, it's very, very important that you let the ground freeze first. Because if you don't, then the rodents will get in there and it's a nice little house for them for the winter. So cover them up all the way to the top. And if you live in a place like BC, you could put a piece of plastic over the top to keep them really dry, but that's all there is to it. And it works like a charm, and the fuchsia will still be here in February.
Canadian Gardener can be seen weekends on CBC.
Hello, I'm Dave Brindle from CBC News World in Calgary. Coming up on Coast to Coast, a special open line program commemorating Remembrance Day. We'll hear from Canadian writer Scott Young about his experience with conscription and anti-Semitism in Toronto during the 1940s. Also, war veterans in Montreal and Regina will share some of their more vivid memories of the Second World War. And I'll want to hear from you. Perhaps you have a story that you would like to tell. That's coming up after the news from Toronto.
Good day from the National Newsroom. Half a world away on this Remembrance Day, Prime Minister Jean Chrétien stood in a military cemetery in Hong Kong. He paid tribute to Canadian soldiers who died defending the colony against Japan during the Second World War. Patrick Brown reports.
At the Saiwan Military Cemetery in Hong Kong, it was in the company of 19 veterans of the first battle fought by Canadians in World War II that Prime Minister Jean Chrétien and the provincial premiers remembered all those who gave their lives for their country. The survivors of the battle for Hong Kong heard a special tribute to Sergeant Major John Osborne of the Winnipeg Grenadiers, who threw himself onto a grenade to save his comrades.
John Osborne threw himself on top of the bomb and died instantly when it exploded.
Osborne's bravery has now been honored by a statue in Hong Kong. His son Jerry, Premier Philman of Manitoba, and some of the men who served with Osborne visited it today. 550 Canadians died in battle here or in Japanese prison camps after the surrender to overwhelming forces. Some veterans are coming back for the first time.
And I'm remembering crawling on my belly here and then dodging bullets, and I'm also saying to myself, well, if I hadn't found that rock to hide behind, I just wouldn't be here today, you know.
On the 11th hour of the 11th day, those who lived remember those who never returned home. Patrick Brown, CBC News, Hong Kong.
Here at home, in cities, towns, and villages across the country, Canadians are also paying their respects to those who fell in war. And as always, in Ottawa for the National Remembrance Day ceremony. Karen Webb has that report.
76 years after that first 11th hour of the 11th day of the 11th month, Canadians still gather to honor the men and women who gave their lives for freedom. Every year there are fewer and fewer Canadians still living who fought in either of the Great Wars or Korea. But for them, the lone piper playing a lament for the dead brings back memories of friends who didn't return.
They shall not grow old as we that are left grow old. Age shall not weary them, nor the years condemn. At the going down of the sun and in the morning, we will remember them.
And the guns commemorate their sacrifice. Earlier in the day, Governor General Reina-Tishin dedicated a book of remembrance listing the war dead of the Merchant Marine, civilian men and women who kept the cargo lanes open across the oceans.
Of those gallant Canadians and Newfoundlanders formerly serving in the Merchant Marine who gave their lives for freedom.
The book will remain in the Peace Tower, along with the other books of remembrance commemorating the lives of Canadians who died in war.
In war we were together as one. In peace, dare we do any less? Let us remember those who fought together in war by remaining together, united as one, in peace, camaraderie, and mutual appreciation.
The ceremony ended as it has always done, with a traditional march past. And for the first time today, a contingent of peacekeeping veterans. So far, 100 Canadians have died wearing the blue beret. Karen Webb, CBC News, Ottawa.
CBC News has obtained a copy of a parliamentary committee report on foreign policy. It will be released next week, and it concludes that policy should focus more on economic interests and less on defense. It also says the UN should have less control over military peacekeeping operations. Susan Harada reports.
Walk softly and carry a big pen, all the better to sign trade deals with. That's the way to go with Canadian foreign policy, according to the Foreign Affairs Committee report obtained by CBC News. The report says efforts like this recent trade swing through China, economic issues, will be the key to global power in the future. That means, says the report, there will be less emphasis on the military aspect. It doesn't mean the committee wants to do away with the Canadian forces, but it suggests the forces become more specialized to carry out peacekeeping operations. At the same time, Canada should only become involved in missions that are clearly focused with some chance of success. The report also supports the government proposal for a permanent UN army, but calls for some curbing of the UN's powers of intervention. In other words, let the UN decide when peacekeeping is needed, and then let regional organizations, such as NATO, actually carry out the operation. The Foreign Affairs report points Canada in a different direction than the one recommended by the Defense Committee last month. On the question of defense, the Foreign Affairs Committee wants a focus on peacekeeping, while the Defense Committee recommended continuing a more traditional role for Canada's military. Susan Harada, CBC News, Ottawa.
Remembrance Day memories, but first a look at today's business figure. Hi, welcome to Coast on CBC News World from Calgary. I'm Dave Brindle. Today there are memorial ceremonies being held on the steps of cenotaphs and other war monuments in Canada and throughout the Commonwealth. It's a day to honor the war dead and commemorate the armistice that ended World War I in 1918. In a few minutes we'll hear from Canadian war veterans about some of their more vivid war experiences. But first I'd like to introduce you to Scott Young. He's a Canadian journalist and author. During the Second World War, he served as an information officer and combat reporter in Europe and the Mediterranean. He's just completed a book about his life and writes quite candidly about some of his experiences in Canada during the war. The book is called A Writer's Life. Mr. Young, I'll start with your chapter in your book, Going to War, and you write about a division in this country which existed then and still exists today. Then the division between French and English was over conscription. Tell us about that.
Well, historically, it went back many, many years to the First World War, but the basic difficulty or the basic difference between the two parts of the country were that the Quebecers did not want to get embroiled in a war that they saw as Britain's war, not as Canada's war, but as Britain's war. Whereas the rest of the country, as they showed in a plebiscite, were overwhelmingly in favor of Canada coming in on Britain's side. What actually happened was there were an awful lot of desertions from the conscripted armies or soldiers in Quebec, and I think at one time there were as many as 7,000 or 8,000 people loose who were AWOL. The situation never changed. The government almost recognized the Quebecers' right to believe the way they did by not really pursuing the deserters very hard.
Do you think some of that animosity that was created over conscription between English and French still exists today?
Well, actually, the animosity has probably been there since even before Confederation. Mm-hmm. And it just seems that every generation has a new set of abrasive happenings that feed the continuing animosity over. I mean, if you think of how many things we argue about with Quebec, it's just ridiculous.
Mm-hmm. The other thing, in those early years, around 1943, you tell a very interesting story about going to sublet the apartment that you and your wife had in Toronto at the time and running into anti-Semitism, which I found surprising in Toronto.
Yeah, well, that was terrible and still is to think about. It actually was in 1941. Mm-hmm. I had just arrived in Toronto a few months before. My wife and I had rented a small apartment in a city-owned Toronto building, and part of the lease was that we couldn't sublet without getting the consent of the city property department. My wife became pregnant, and we realized that a one-room apartment, bachelor apartment, was not big enough, so we found another one and advertised to sublet the apartment that we had, which was a beautiful one right on the lake and great. So a young couple came, and they loved it, and they said they wanted to take it, and I told them where to go down to City Hall to sign the papers and so on. And he phoned me a day or two later. Meanwhile, we'd rented another apartment. He phoned and said that they were going to have to break off this arrangement we had. And I said, why? And he said, well, it seems we're not eligible for that apartment. And I persisted, why? And he finally told me that the person at the Toronto City Property Department had told him that there was an understanding among all the property owners in the eastern beaches area of Toronto, which included where this apartment was. There was an understanding that nobody would sell or rent to Jews, and this young couple was Jewish, and I couldn't believe it. I mean, this was Hitlerism right in downtown Toronto, and nobody seemed to care about it. So I went to the property department, and I told people that I wanted to see the commissioner, the top guy in the department. and I got some arguments, but I managed to get in to see him. And I told him that I was not. I mean, I guess I railed at him a bit about this evidence of you know, anti-Semitism right in a city that had a huge number of Jewish property owners, voters, business people. You know how it would be.
See, so many in my generation have an impression of the war years in Canada as being, well, quite merry, that everybody banding together and working for the war effort, but you tell stories of anti-Semitism and the division between French and English over conscription, and that really wasn't necessarily the case.
We were still merry and on the side. No, the anti-Semitism thing, I practically threatened the property commissioner with writing a story about it in the Toronto Star. But the two people who were being shut out, the Jewish couple, they said, please don't. Our families, our jobs, we want to find another apartment. We don't want to be stigmatized by what you would write. So I didn't write it, but the property department did not insist that I look for somebody else to sublet.
Now, you were a war correspondent during World War II. Are you one, Mr. Young, for sitting around and telling war stories?
Only at times like this. No, it's when I find myself in a war story, which is usually because one of my children or grandchildren have asked me some direct question, I always put on the brakes, because I don't have any animosity towards the people who do sit around the Legion halls and have a few beers and tell a lot of old stories. I have no animosity towards those people at all. But in my own life, I think that's looking backward, and I would rather look forward.
Why do you think that is, that some veterans love to spend their days sitting around the Legion, quaffing a few, telling war stories, and many other veterans, I would guess probably an equal amount, just don't like to talk about their experiences in the war?
Well, I think the ones that like to talk maybe haven't had things as interesting happen to them after they were demobilized or in their later lives, or maybe a guy's wife won't let him tell war stories, so he's got to go to the Legion to tell them to people who know what he's talking about. What the heck, everybody's got things in their life that they like recalling.
I'm wondering, I was thinking this morning before coming in to talk to you on this Remembrance Day, what might happen when the last veteran dies? Well, and if you've ever speculated about that.
Yeah, well, this is happening all the time. Like an organization I belong to, which is called the Canadian War Correspondents Association, we have lost so many people, and we have added to the membership by various means. Any time somebody fought in the war anywhere, he became eligible. But the organization has pretty well decided that to go peacefully and just disband, because the purpose we were put together for is no longer there.
Well, but what do you think when the last veteran dies? What will happen to this day, Remembrance Day?
Well, I think it'll probably still be recognized, because humanity has a terrible time dropping holidays once they get it established, you know. No, I think it will survive as a place where history can focus not only on World Wars I and II and on the Korean War and so on, but maybe back to the Riel Rebellion. We'll focus on all the wars that mankind has fought that we Canadians have been part of.
One last question for you, Mr. Young, before I let you go today, and it's about these poppies that both you and I are wearing, and I wanted to get your reaction to the controversy that has come up over these poppies around Remembrance Day this year, and many people objecting to wearing them because of the headgear issue within Legion halls.
Well, I think that headgear issue is absolutely ridiculous, and the Legion branches that support them should look themselves pretty hard in the eye. It seems to me it's just an excuse on their part to keep certain people of certain colors and religious backgrounds out of their premises and out of their way so they don't have to think about them. And I'm all on the side of people who insist that religious matters should not be allowed to break the main thrust of what the Legion is all about.
Mr. Young, a pleasure talking to you today.
Thank you.
When we come back, we'll hear from veterans at the Notre Dame de Grâce in Montreal, and I'd like to hear from you. You're with Coast to Coast on CBC News World from Calgary. I'm Dave Brindle. Today, a special Coast to Coast commemorating Remembrance Day. Many of the veterans who survived the war are gathering with friends today to remember and honor the many people who served and lost their lives. Let's go now to Notre Dame de Grâce, Our Lady of Grace in Montreal, where veterans reminisce where they were 50 years ago today.
Italy. I took part in the invasion of Sicily, and we didn't have our shoes off for 38 days in Sicily. After the invasion, we went over through the Messina Straits up to Reggio Calabria, and we proceeded up, and we were against the Panzer Division. The people there were evacuating from North Africa. They were drawing the troops into Sicily and Italy to try to wipe us out. But they didn't. We succeeded. We were known, I was with the 1st Division, we were known as the Red Patch Devils.
I served with the RAF in World War II. I was a barrage balloon operator. I was on Clydebank in Scotland, and we used to put the balloons up. They had sort of a ripcord on the cable, and when the planes came down to attack, if they caught the cable, this ripcord went off almost like a bomb or a gun or something, and it broke the cable, and the cable went around the wings of the plane and brought it down.
I was in the infantry, and we were doing river crossings, getting in the diked rivers in Italy. Incidentally, which in the summer are negligible rivers, but in the winter the water comes up high, so they're diked. They've got about 30-foot high dikes that means you have to go over, take a boat across, then go over again and meet the Germans personally.
Go to the phone lines now. Hello, Rob in Kingston.
Hello, I'm as a youth of Canada and a son of a veteran. I wish to condolence to all members who've lost their family during the First, Second World War and Korean War in peacetime. My father, our great uncle, served in the First World War with the Brockville Rifles. Father served in the Royal Canadian Navy in the Second World War, as well as in the Korean War. Mother served as a Wren in the British Navy. And I just would like to take a few minutes out and say thank you to all the veterans out there who are living and who have passed away since. And I'm very grateful being the son of a veteran and being a Canadian at soul. Now, as the gentleman was talking earlier about the Quebec people, or the French people in Quebec, I can remember my uncle saying that they used to take, they were forced by armed soldiers to keep them on the ship while they were going leaving Bedford Basin to England because they were jumping ship. Now, I can remember that. Now that's, conscription was brought in, like, I mean, it's like any other war. If you're forced to, fight for your country, well, so be it. I mean, I would do it today if it came around.
Well, thanks very much for calling, Rob.
Thank you.
Appreciate it. O'Neill in Montreal. Hi, O'Neill.
Hi, Dave. I'm 22 years old, and I appreciate the sacrifice soldiers made for us. But for me, it's really kind of touchy because I'm looking towards the future. I'm here in Montreal. And it's a separation issue that's going on and preparing for another civil war right here in Canada.
Well, that's something that we could speculate on for hours and on another program, I think, O'Neill, and thanks very much for calling in and giving us your thoughts. Tim in Toronto. Hi, Tim.
Hi, good afternoon. When I was younger, I met a war vet that showed me a selection of medals that he had received.
Yeah.
And very shortly, he grabbed them in his hand and flinged them against a wall and suggested that, in fact, it was a useless venture on his part and regretted his involvement in the war. Seems that a lot of veterans would be more anxious to remember the horrors and the angst of war rather than the lessons of peace. And I thought what would be more realistic on Remembrance Day is holding an international Peace Day celebration to remember those that have died in giving peace.
Well, isn't that part of the day? Isn't that part of Remembrance Day, is thanking the people that gave us our freedom and peace?
In light of all the conflicts that have been suggested by Scott Young and even others that exist within the current ranks of those that would have us believe that there was something to be noted in all their efforts, to me it suggests that unless we give up our more violent ways and learn the lessons of peace that Christ had taught us, we're really not going to get out of the morass we're in, because we're applying the wrong means to the ends of peace. In fact, there's only one way to get to the end of peace, and that's by the application of peaceful means.
Thanks, Tim. Jeff in St. Catharines. Hi, Jeff.
Hi.
Go ahead.
Well, I just wanted to, I'm 27 myself, and I had a grandfather that served overseas in World War II. And, well, it's just funny, and, you know, the way Canada is now, there's a lot of political correctness and things like this. And I think my grandfather was probably one of the first anti-smoking advocates, and it's really funny because he smoked when he was overseas, and it was actually a cigarette package that saved his life.
Is that right?
And he passed away in a veterans hospital just last year, but one of the last times I saw him before he passed away, he said he'd found something that he'd like to give me, and it was this cigarette package.
Wow.
And, you know, I look at that now, and I think of him and every Remembrance Day, you know, and I'm just thankful that, you know, people and, you know, thousands of others like him were, you know, did what they did for us. So, you know, so we could have a country. I mean, as screwed up as it is at times, you know, we're still allowed, we're free.
Right,
you know,
right.
And that's what I'm thankful for.
All right. Oh, Jeff, I've got to ask you, are you a smoker?
Yeah. That's what basically...
You didn't follow your grandfather's advice on that, did you?
No, well, that was the whole thing, is he got into it, and he was always such a, you know, the first person to give you a heck when you lit one up.
Sure.
And then it was my grandmother said, well, you know, don't think he's such a do-gooder. He smoked himself. And it was just when they moved, after my grandmother passed away, and they were cleaning out the apartment that they lived in, and he said, oh, I found something I'd like to give to you. And he said, you know, I did smoke, and yeah, I guess I should be a little easier on it, because if it wasn't for the fact that he did, you know, he might not be here today.
Right, right. Thanks a lot, Jeff.
Oh, okay.
If you have a memory or a story you'd like to share, give me a call. Long distance toll free, 1-800.
There's no question about it.
D-Day plus 50, tonight at 9 on CBC News World.
I think. Some amazing black and white footage from the war years. Welcome to our special Remembrance Day program on Coast to Coast. I'm Dave Brindle. We'll take more of your calls in just a few minutes, but first, with their memories from 50 years ago, let's go to the Royal Canadian Legion in Regina and hear from veterans there.
50 years ago today, I was in southern Italy, and we were finishing up down there and getting ready to come up and help them on the Western Front. That's about it, 50 years ago.
I worked in the post office in Halifax and in London and in Glasgow. And then back to London and back to Halifax and then to Ottawa, and that's where I got my discharge from Ottawa.
50 years ago, we just went over. We didn't want the Germans taking control of our country, so that's why we volunteered. I had 4 brothers overseas. 2 brothers couldn't get it and were disabled before they got over. And 1 brother was disqualified because he had hearing problems. My sister was too young. But we enjoyed the program over there, and it was something that $39 a month, a guy wouldn't even think of joining the Army now for $39. And it was one thing that, I don't know, I guess maybe it was our duty that we go over and save our country from being overrun.
Well, the feelings weren't too good because in London, of course, as you know, just before that, Jerry was sending buzz bombs and rockets over, and of course, we were involved in that, and clearing people out of houses and whatnot. No matter where we were at any time we were called, we had to go and help. And I don't know about 50 years, whether it was 50 years ago or not, but there was something I could say. A buzz bomb hit a building that a couple of my buddies were in, and so we were delegated to go and dig them out. And while we were doing this, we found them all right, and in their bedroom, this was at night that it happened, in the bedroom they had one of these loose clothes closets, and the clothes closet came over top of their bed, and when we got to them, all the one fellow had was a little scrape on his lip. They were completely safe by that clothes closet. So that was that sticks in my mind quite a bit. And these, especially November the 11th, you think back of your buddies that were doing a little more than I was doing in the fighting area, and I'm thinking about some of those friends of mine that I lost.
50 years ago today, I was in Holland, and it was about 50 years ago today, we were disbanding the Royal Canadian Engineers, and I was transferred to the Special Inquiry Section, which is also the Court Martial Center. And I had been in Italy, Sicily, and France, Belgium, and we ended up in Holland, which was a very lucky break for the Canadians. I also got married just a little more than 50 years ago in Holland. And I sure hope we don't see again what we went through in those 5 years that I was overseas. The cost, the waste, the pain and misery is beyond belief. Let's hope and pray it never happens again.
Let's hear more of your memories now. Rita in Ottawa. Hi, Rita.
Hi.
Go ahead.
Well, my memory is that my dad went overseas when I was a young child to the war, and I remember him coming back. And he was also in the First World War, and my brother-in-law was in the war and came back, met my sister and married her. But now there are people out there who are saying they were in the Korean War and that they were in the Second World War, and honest to God, they're not old enough, and they're very fraudulent as far as I'm concerned, and I wish they would stop saying they were in the war when they weren't.
Mm-hmm.
We have a friend today who's in Hong Kong. He was a prisoner of war with the Japs, and he suffered terribly for 4 years under their hands. And so those of you who are fraudulently saying you were there and aren't, it's terrible, because you're lying.
Okay, Rita, thanks. Phyllis in Toronto. Hi, Phyllis.
Hi.
Go ahead.
Now, 50 years ago, I was a schoolgirl still in India, in the northeast part where the Japanese were more or less quite strong there. But I don't know if there was any Canadian troops in that area. There were lots of Americans and British. And I do remember, the Japs flying over with dog fights when we were children.
Mm-hmm.
Now, at this age, at 65, I've just retired working for the veterans at Sunnybrook Hospital for 19 years. So I do feel I gave them something back for what they did, for the world.
Yes. All right, Phyllis, thanks very much for calling.
Bye-bye.
Who do we have now? Julia in Sudbury. Hi, Julia.
Hi there. I just wanted to tell you a story about a Remembrance Day service in 1974.
Okay.
My husband, who was a veteran of the Korean conflict, and myself and the children were at the cenotaph, and we saw this old man there with the beret of blue and scuffy shoes and kind of tattered trousers, and he looked like he was kind of down and out. So my husband indicated after the ceremony, you know, why don't you go and see if you can help him in some way. So as he went to get the car with the children, I went to go to the chap, and I was a little nervous and shy because he looked so proud, even though he looked down and out. So I just watched where he went. He went into the Salvation Army Harbor Light. So I told my husband the next day we went down to try to help him in some way. And they said he comes in every year on the 10th, and he stays for the 11th, and then he goes. We think he's Sudbury born and First World War veteran. You'll have to wait till next year. So that night I went home, and I couldn't sleep for thinking about him, so I wrote open letter to an old soldier, and it was published in the paper the next day. Well, the phone rang off the hook with every old soldier in the city.
I'll bet.
And I had said, I saw you in the park today, dear old soldier, proud and brave, with ragged coat and scuffy shoes, but on your head beret of blue. And then I went on to tell him I wanted to go up to you, but, you know, I couldn't. And then that he walked up Minto Street in Sudbury, went into Salvation Army. Where are you now, old soldier brave, who fought democracy to save? You who fought that we might live, I could not then one moment give, but left you lost and all alone, a hostile room to call your home. So anyway, about 2 days later, the housekeeper I was teaching said, there's a whole list of numbers there of old soldiers and sweethearts and lovers and friends and in-laws and outlaws of old soldiers, so give them a call. So I dialed the first number, and this old guy answered, and he was obviously in his cups, and he said, my wife hasn't seen tears in my eyes for 40 damn years, but by gee, she saw them there tonight. And so I laughed, and he said over his shoulder, obviously to his wife, that was true, eh, that guy? You saw that guy. That was a real guy, eh? And I said, yeah, that was a real guy. So in the 20 years, it's been in the schools, that poem, and it's published often, and I get lots of response, like I said, from every old soldier that fought over there, and from men and women and children of veterans. And so it was a very inspiring moment, 1974, November the 11th.
Thanks a lot, Julia. That's great.
Okay, then.
Bye-bye. Let's go to Bert in Winnipeg. Hi, Bert.
Good morning.
Honoring Canada's war dead. Recommendations for a major switch in Canada's foreign policy. And the Law Society of Upper Canada alleges Alan Eagleson mishandled his client's funds.
76 years after that first 11th hour of the 11th day of the 11th month, Canadians still gather to honor the men and women who gave their lives for freedom. Every year there are fewer and fewer Canadians still living who fought in either of the Great Wars or Korea. But for them, the lone piper playing a lament for the dead brings back memories of friends who didn't return.
They shall not grow old as we that are left grow old. Age shall not weary them, nor the years condemn. At the going down of the sun and in the morning, we will remember them.
And the guns commemorate their sacrifice. Earlier in the day, Governor General Ray Natishan dedicated a book of remembrance listing the war dead of the Merchant Marine, civilian men and women who kept the cargo lanes open across the oceans.
Of those gallant Canadians and Newfoundlanders formerly serving in the Merchant Marine who gave their lives for freedom.
The book will remain in the Peace Tower, along with the other books of remembrance commemorating the lives of Canadians who died in war.
In war we were together as one. In peace, dare we do any less? Let us remember those who fought together in war by remaining together, united as one, in peace, camaraderie, and mutual appreciation.
The ceremony ended as it has always done, with the traditional march past. And for the first time today, a contingent of peacekeeping veterans. So far, 100 Canadians have died wearing the blue beret. Karen Webb, CBC News, Ottawa.
Prime Minister Chrétien was on the other side of the globe today in Hong Kong, but he paused to pay his respects to the war dead in a military cemetery. Chrétien paid tribute to Canadian soldiers who fell defending the British colony during the Second World War. More from Patrick Brown.
At the Saiwan Military Cemetery in Hong Kong, it was in the company of 19 veterans of the first battle fought by Canadians in World War II that Prime Minister Jean Chrétien and the provincial premiers remembered all those who gave their lives for their country. The survivors of the battle for Hong Kong heard a special tribute to Sergeant Major John Osborne of the Winnipeg Grenadiers, who threw himself onto a grenade to save his comrades.
John Osborne threw himself on top of the bomb and died instantly when it exploded.
Osborne's bravery has now been honored by a statue in Hong Kong. His son Jerry, Premier Philman of Manitoba, and some of the men who served with Osborne visited it today. 550 Canadians died in battle here or in Japanese prison camps after the surrender to overwhelming forces. Some veterans are coming back for the first time.
And I'm remembering crawling on my belly here and dodging bullets, and I'm also saying to myself, well, if I hadn't found that rock to hide behind, I just wouldn't be here today, you know.
On the 11th hour of the 11th day, those who lived remember those who never returned home. Patrick Brown, CBC News, Hong Kong.
A parliamentary Remembrance Day thoughts from Don Newman right after this break.
Now you do.
Scenes from the cenotaph in Ottawa earlier today. Don Newman joins us now from Ottawa. Don, you were covering the Remembrance Day ceremonies, as you always do, on Parliament Hill. Today, this year, the special recognition given to a number of contingents, among them members of the Merchant Marine.
That's right. The Merchant Marine has for a number of years wanted to be included in what they call the Vice-Regal Ceremony, which is the official wreath-laying ceremony led by the Governor-General. They have not been until this year, but they were included this year. It is not guaranteed they will be included again, but they were included this year because there was a special book of remembrance put in the remembrance room here on Parliament Hill for merchant mariners. About 2,000 members of the Canadian Merchant Marine were killed during World War II. 14,000 in all served. And of course, it was a pretty dangerous job out there on the freighters, often without escort and with very few guns with which to defend themselves on slow-moving ships. So they, this year, did have a wreath laid by one of their members, and that was a particular event for them. Also, Chinese-Canadian veterans. You know, there were Chinese-Canadians, about 800 of them, joined up in the armed forces. And back during World War II, Chinese-Canadians weren't even recognized as citizens, but a contingent of them, led by a former MP named Douglas Jung, were here in Ottawa as well.
Well, as we spend the day honoring Canadian commitment to and sacrifice in various global conflicts, we're also hearing some details of a report to be issued by a parliamentary committee that deals with a review of foreign affairs and looks as well specifically at peacekeeping.
Well, that's true. It looks at peacekeeping, but the interesting thing, it says, yes, that Canadians, what it really says is that Canadians now have to understand more directly what their interests are in a number of different activities if we are going to get involved, including peacekeeping, that we have to see what the Canadian interest is, that we can't just necessarily be the kind of international Boy Scouts we've been before, going off to every UN peacekeeping operation since 1947. It also says essentially that foreign policy should be tied to economic policy and Canada's economic well-being, that with the end of the Cold War, there is now an international competition among former allies, including Europe, the United States, and Japan, and that we have to fit into that economic arrangement, and that international organizations like the World Trading Organization, the extension of GATT, are important to Canada, but we should look at our economic interest and our political interest before we get too committed at very much.
Well, the Prime Minister today was taking part in Remembrance Day ceremonies in Hong Kong, which really caps a week, by all accounts, a huge success for Team Canada.
Certainly, that is the way it is being portrayed, and the Prime Minister looked pretty happy, didn't he, as he was riding a bike in Shanghai. A lot of contracts signed, not all of the money delivered yet, not all of the jobs obviously delivered yet. But yes, the government is saying it is a big success. The premiers are there, except for Jacques Parizeau. They say it's a big success. And let's face it, it looks like it's a big success.
Well, some of the questions that you raise about what the number of jobs and what are the details in the various contracts, I think we can assume that, opposition MPs will be putting some of those questions to the government next week when the House resumes?
I think they will, and I think that if the jobs don't materialize in a reasonable